In today's video, I'm going to show you how you can easily turn this boring CSV file into a table in a PostgreSQL database that you can easily query using Python only. Hey, my name is Mo Chen, and I work as a data and analytics analyst within the financial services industry. In today's video, I'm going to show you how you can easily create a database in PostgreSQL, create a table within this database, and then insert the values from the CSV file into this table, and then finally query this table to get quick insights, all whilst using Python only. If you want to do this exercise and follow along, make sure you have pgadmin installed, which is going to be your PostgreSQL tool, and make sure you have a Jupyter notebook to work in. The links to the tool and the code are in the description below. Make sure to check them out if you're interested. First, I'll walk you through the dataset and the exercise file, which will help you understand the underlying workings of the code. Then we'll create some functions, include some SQL statements in the function, and then we're going to write a very simple script. If you stick around till the end of the video, I'm going to show you how you can turn all of this code into this one-liner code only. How cool is that? Okay, so the CSV file is a really simple CSV file with employee data. So these are people working at various coffee shops. So you can see here that we have the employee ID, the first name, last name, email, hire date, shop name, and then finally the salary column, and that's it. So let's quickly jump into our exercise file. And you can see that on the left, I have a Jupyter notebook open, and on the right, I have the pgadmin tool open. So the reason for that is because this way I can show you that whenever we create a database or a table within this database, whenever I refresh this database, you'll see them appear. So you can actually see that we've done something and created something. So on the left here in the Jupyter notebook, I already typed out all of the code. I won't be typing out anything really. I'll just walk you through the underlying workings of the code. I'll explain everything in detail so you get a better understanding of what's actually going on. So at the top here, you can use the pip install method to install the necessary libraries if you don't already have them. So we'll use IPython SQL to connect to the database, and then config parser to read in our parameters from a separate file. It's always good to keep your sensitive information like your password in a separate file. Then obviously we'll need pandas, and then we'll use psychopg2 to connect to our SQL database as well. So after that, let me just import all of these libraries. And then you see here that I'm also importing or using a magic function here, loading a magic function, which is the load extension SQL. So this is going to allow us to run SQL statements straight from within the Jupyter notebook. So next up, let's read the parameters from the configuration file. And before that, let me just go to this configuration file here. Let me show you what it looks like. So it contains really simple information like the default database name, which is Postgres, default username, database username, Postgres, and then again, the password, which is whatever your chosen password is. And if you're wondering where you can find this information, if you go into your Postgres database, which is, by the way, the default database that the pgadmin tool comes with, you go into properties, and then you see within properties, you have the database, which is Postgres, and then the database owner, which is the database user, which again is called Postgres. So let's just head back into our exercise file, and let me use config parser to get all of these parameters and store them in db name default, db user, and db password. Next up, we're going to connect to this default database using psychopg2. So we're going to create a connection first, and then we're going to get a cursor to this connection. So to create this connection, you need to pass in the host name, which is going to be 127.0.0.1, which just refers to your local host, your local machine. And then you need to pass in the database name, the username, and then the password. After that, we're setting auto commit to true because by default, auto commit is set to false, but we want our changes to be committed. So we set this to true. And then finally, once we have the connection, we're going to get a cursor to this connection. So let me just run this code now. Now, after that, we're going to create the coffee shops database. So first of all, we're going to drop the database if it already exists. This is just good practice. And then we'll create the coffee shops database with UTF-8 encoding and template0 template. So let me just run this code here. And once I've run this, let me just go back to our databases, right-click, and hit refresh. So now you see that all of a sudden coffee shops appeared here. And if I click into coffee shops and then go into schemas, under schemas go into table, you can see that I currently have 0 tables within this database, which makes sense because I just created it. So back into our exercise file, let me just close the connection to the default database. And then after that, we're going to connect to the newly created coffee shops database. So again, we're going to first create a connection and then get a cursor to this connection. So again, we need to pass in the host name, which remains our local host. And then the database name this time is coffee shops, obviously. And then we already stored the user and then the password in the DB user and DB password variables. Let me just run this line of code here. Okay, so now we're going to drop the employees table if it already exists. Well, we know it doesn't exist, but again, it's just good practice. Really simple drop table SQL statement here. Let me just run this line of code. And then after that, we're going to finally create the employees table. So again, really simple create table SQL statement here. You need to pass in your column name. So employee ID, first name, last name, email, hire date, shop name, and then salary. And then obviously you need to define the data type. So it'll be integer for employee ID. And then you have some varchar 50s, date for hire date, varchar 50 again for the shop name, and then integer for the salary. And then in this table, we're going to define the primary key as the employee ID. And then finally, we'll commit our changes because, like I said, by default, auto commit is set to false. So let me just run this line of code. And now let me go back into our coffee shops database. Let me go refresh it. And then now you see that under tables, we have the employees table here. So we've successfully created this table within our database. Back into our exercise file. Now what I'm going to do is I'll read in the coffeeshop.csv file as a pandas data frame. So let me just do that. We can explore the data using df.info. So you can see that we have 100 non-null observations, and really the only column that has missing values is the email column, which has 26 missing values. 100 minus 26 is equal to 74. You can, of course, easily print the top and the bottom of the data frame, and then you can use the describe method to describe the numerical columns. And then underneath that, I just did a quick value count on the email column to show you that we indeed have 26 missing values. And I define drop NA is equal to false here, because by default, if I run this code without the drop NA specification, by default, drop NA is equal to true. So you won't actually see that information. So let me just put that back in. And then we can see that we have 26 missing values in the email column. So next up, we're going to actually insert the values from this data frame into the coffee shop database within our employees table. So what we're going to do essentially, let me just go back to the CSV file, is we'll go through this CSV file line by line, and then we're going to insert the first row, and then the second row, and then the third row, all the way until we get to the end. So back into the exercise file, we'll be using df.iterRows to iterate through the data frame. And then we're using insert into, you define the table name, you pass in which columns you want to insert into, and then what values. So we're using %s here, which is kind of just like a string joker within SQL. It's just a placeholder for the values that we'll pass in, which will be this row.toList values. So before I do that, let me just show you how this iteration would look like. So let me pass this one in, and let me just print row.toList. And I don't want to print the whole thing, so I'll say if I say is equal to 5, then I want it to break. So you see here that it's the first row, and then it's the second row, and then the third row. So these are the values that we'll be passing in to the data frame. So let me delete that, and then let me actually run this line of code to insert values into our table. And then after that, let's just close the connection to the coffee shops database. So now we've created a coffee shops database, we created the employees table, and we inserted the values from the CSV file into this table. So now we're going to use %SQL, the magic function, and then we're going to connect to our database and run some sample queries straight from within the Jupyter notebook. So first of all, we're going to connect to the coffee shops database. So you pass in, again, the database username and then the password. And then again, you can pass in the host name, which is going to be the local host, and then you define the database name. And then you use %SQL, which is the magic function, and then you pass in your connection string. So let me just run that, and there we go. We connected to our database. Now, first of all, we're going to select count everything from the employees table, just to count the rows in the table. Let me just run that. And you can see here that we successfully connected, and then the count is 100, which looks correct because that's all the rows within our data frame. Now, next up, I'll select all of the records from the employees table. So select star from employees, very basic SQL statement, and we can see that it looks like we've inserted all of the values correctly. So after that, I'm selecting only rows with missing emails using the where clause, and we can see that we have 26 rows affected, which is correct because we did have 26 missing values. You see all the values in the email column here, NAN, all the way down. Now, next up, I'll select the average, the minimum, and the maximum salary here. So let me just do that. I rounded the average salary to no decimals. So you can see here that the average salary is over $40,000, the minimum is under 10, and then the maximum salary is almost $68,000. Underneath that, I'm going to order by the number of employees per shop in a descending order. So we can see from here that the urban grind has the most number of employees and common grounds has the fewest employees with 32 employees. Now, underneath that, I'm going to order by the average salary per shop ascending. So let me just run this line of code. And we can see that urban grind employees on average get paid the least, and common grounds employees on average get paid the most. Okay, so now you have a good understanding of how the underlying code works. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create some functions, include some SQL statements in these functions to create a script so we can go from all of this code that we've written here to just a single line of code right here to execute everything. So let's jump into the final file, which will contain the functions, which is right here. And you can see at the top here that we're importing pretty much the same thing. So psychopg2 config parser pandas, but then from SQL queries, we're importing everything. So what's actually in this SQL queries file? Well, I just included some really simple SQL statements. So I included the drop table statement here, the create employees table statement here, and then the insert statement here. This just helps keep our code separate and neat. So back into the final file, the first function we will create is the create database function. So this will create and connect to the coffeeshops database and then return the connection and the cursor to this database. So the code below here, that's everything we've already gone through. It's literally the exact same thing, just within a function. But at the end here, you can see that we're returning the cursor and the connection. So the next function we're going to create is the drop table function. This function takes two arguments, cursor and the connection. So this will drop the employees table. And then you see here, the code goes cursor.execute drop employees table. So this drop employees table, it's essentially just this drop table query here. It's that simple. And then back into our final file, the next function we'll create is the create table function. So we pass in, again, two arguments to this cursor and the connection. And this function will just create the employees table. Again, the query is here, create employees table. It's within our SQL queries file. So if you come in here, create employees table is equal to this create table statement here. Back into our final file again. The next up is the insert table function, which again takes two arguments, the cursor and the connection. And this function will insert the values from the CSV file into our employees table. So first of all, we need to read in the CSV file as a pandas data frame. And then we're just going to use this iteration method again. And then we'll use the insert employees table SQL query, which let's just go back into our SQL file. It's right here on the bottom. It's everything we've already gone through before. So back into our final file, let's just go on to our last function here, which is going to be our main function, and it'll do everything for us. So it'll drop the database coffeeshops if it already exists, and it'll create the database. It'll establish a connection and get a cursor to it, drop the employees table if it already exists, then it'll create the employees table, then we'll insert the coffeeshop.csv values into this employees table, and then finally we'll close the connection to the database. So first of all, we need to return the cursor and the connection using the create database function. Then we'll use the drop table function. And then now we already have the cursor and the connection, so we can pass in these two arguments into the drop table function. Then we'll create the tables using the create table function. And then we'll insert into the table using the insert table function. And then finally, we'll close our connection. And at the bottom here, you see this if double underscore or thunder name function here. This essentially is just to only run the code inside the statement when the program is run directly by the Python interpreter. So the code inside the if statement is not actually executed when the file's code is imported as a module. Okay, so now let's just go to our script, which is right here. So we're going to be running this one-liner code only using the %run magic function. And let me just go back to my pgadmin tool. And you can see here that all I did quickly was just to delete the coffeeshops database. So you can actually see that something is happening. So let me do a quick refresh here. And you can see that at the moment, we only have the default, which is the Postgres database. So back into our scripting file. So let me just run this script here, just this one line of code only. So it took a couple seconds and now it's done. Let me go back into my pgadmin tool, go to databases and hit refresh. And you see all of a sudden we have the coffeeshops database pop up. If I go into schemas and then under schemas, I go into tables, you can see that I have the employees table right here. So essentially we just went from all of this code right here to just executing this one line of code. And supposedly we've done everything correctly, but obviously we need to check this. So let me just use some sample queries. Again, let's just connect to our database first. So that's done. And then after that, I'm just going to run the same sample queries. So let's count all of the rows. Let me just run this. Yes, 100. Perfect. Select all of the records. Let's scroll through it. Yeah, looks about right. And then we can select all of the missing emails. Again, we have 26 rows affected. So looks good to me again. Now, after that, let's go for the average salary, minimum and maximum. And you can see here that we get the same numbers as before. Now we're going to order by the number of employees per shop descending. So there we go. Urban Grind still has the most number of employees and Common Ground still has the fewest employees. And then finally, we're going to order by the average salary per shop ascending. And there we go. And the situation is again the same. Common Ground's employees still get paid on average the best. If you liked this video, make sure to check out some of my other videos as well. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.